Hello everyone. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at plant defense mechanisms. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to identify plant defense responses to pathogens. Now, you might not know this, but plants have an immune system just like us. Plants are constantly faced with several enemies. It's things like organisms trying to feed on them, insects, birds, animals, and even pathogens such as bacteria, fungi, and viruses that are trying to infect them. So, just like us, plants can get sick, and just like us, plants need some form of immune system to fight back those pathogens, to fight back those diseases. Okay, so as you saw, a plant's immune system is nothing, it's definitely not simple. It's extremely complicated, it's very advanced, and we often underestimate plants, like how cool and how pretty amazing they are. So, as you saw, they use several things. They use physical barriers, things like the waxy coating that we will talk more about later. They use chemical toxins. They produce these chemicals that have several effects. And as you can see, it even affects humans and animals. And finally, like they even recruit or, call on other organisms such as the wasp that you saw, the insect. to come and help them out. It's quite awesome if you really kind of sit and think about it. Now, let's quickly recap some terminologies before we move on. The first word here is pathogens, and we already kind of went over what a pathogen is. It's anything that causes disease, any disease-causing agent. So there are obviously more pathogens out there than what's on this list, but for our purposes today, we're going to focus on fungi, bacteria, and these things called nematodes as being pathogens that affect plants. So nematodes are these worms. So they kind of are these very tiny, almost microscopic worms that can infect basically plants, and they can cause disease in plants. Now, they're not really something that we worry about as humans for our own immune system usually, but they are definitely a threat to plants. When it comes to the immune responses that plants have, for us, we have the first, second, and third lines of defense that we've already discussed when we talked about our immune system. But for plants, we can break down their defenses into two categories. The first is physical defense. So the dermal tissue that we've already talked about when we discussed our plant unit, right? So dermal tissue, if you remember, is the outermost layer of plants. It's the outer tissue. It's protective. It's like the plant skin. And the dermal tissue contains the waxy coating. It also, makes up the bark, which sometimes might have thorns and spines. So plants, all of these factors are things that allow plants to physically defend themselves from outside harmful pathogens or insects, etc. So the waxy coating, if you remember, it's very thickened in plants. It's quite thick, and this prevents pathogens from actually coming in. The bark is also very rigid. Okay, we can see the bark right here. Very rigid, very strong, and it basically, again, provides a very strong, tough physical barriers to prevent pathogens and other enemies of the plants from kind of infecting it or invading it. And of course, we know that some types of plants, not all, but some will have thorns and spines. And these physical characteristics, again, are protective measures. In addition, we know that plants have a very rigid cell wall. We already talked about that, right? So cell wall is only found in plant cells. And the cell wall is a thick protective layer that is found around plant cells. And specifically, another component of cell walls is lignin, if you remember this. Okay, so lignin is the type of protein or the type of chemical that gives the cell wall its rigidity, its structure, its toughness. And in addition, lignin is undigestible. So if a pathogen was trying to break through into a plant, it can't really digest the lignin. So it becomes more difficult for it to kind of invade the plant because it's not able to digest this particular chemical. Another physical defense mechanism is the closing of the stomata. And if you remember, just as a review, stomata is the opening that is found in the dermal tissue, and it's found usually on the lower part of the leaf. If you remember, the stomata is controlled by these guard cells. We see them right here. Okay, these are the two guard cells. And the guard cells, if you remember, will open and close depending on many factors. And when we were learning about plants, we learned that when there is high amounts of water in the plant, the water pressure increases or builds in the guard cells, which causes them to open up, and transpiration occurs, right? Which is like plant sweating or evaporation of water vapor. And when there is low amounts of water in the plant, low water pressure occurs in the guard cells, causing them to close up, which prevents transpiration from happening. Another condition that controls whether or not the stomata is open or closed that we didn't talk about when we learned about plants is, as a defense mechanism. So sometimes the plant will sense that it's being attacked by a pathogen or by insects, etc. And as a way to defend itself, to close up any barrier or any opening that is present in its outer layer, it will close the stomata. Remember, the stomatas are the only holes or the pores that are found in the dermal tissue, in the leaves. So this is the only access. Think of it as a doorway or a gate into the inside of the plant. So if it's open, that makes it extra vulnerable. So to kind of protect itself even more, what it does is it closes up these stomatas. The next type of defense that we want to talk about that plants exhibit are chemical defenses. And this can be in the form of several things. So the first chemical defense that plants have are toxins. And toxins are basically chemicals that are toxic, okay? So they can harm organisms that ingest them. They can cause you to feel sick. They can cause insects to feel sick. They can cause pathogens such as bacteria to feel sick, etc. Obviously, there's a bunch of toxins. The list is very, very big. And depending on the type of plant, different plants will have different toxins, and they will use them for defense against different pathogens. Not all plants have toxins, right? But many types of plants will exhibit this as kind of a defense mechanism. Interestingly, though, some of these toxins, us humans have, figured out that we could use for our own benefit. So nicotine, which is found in the tobacco plant, nicotine is a chemical that is toxic to certain organisms. If certain organisms consume a tobacco plant and they ingest enough nicotine, they can feel sick. They can end up dying. Okay, they can be poisoned. However, for us humans, we realized, hey, nicotine is something or a chemical that ends up causing us to feel nice, kind of nice, right? It produces mild euphoric feelings, and humans have decided to use that for, I don't know, benefit, because nicotine is highly addictive. So I don't know if it's beneficial, but it's used by humans, and obviously it doesn't make us feel sick. It's not toxic. However, if we were to ingest high amounts of nicotine, yes, it would cause poisoning. There is such thing as nicotine poisoning. Another really interesting toxin is caffeine, and caffeine is, again, toxic to other organisms. So it's produced by plants as a kind of like a defense mechanism. But for us, we realized, hey, if we use this chemical, if we use a coffee bean, we grind it up and we drink it, it gives us lots of energy, right? It makes us feel really kind of stimulated. And again, if we were to consume high amounts of caffeine, we would be poisoned by it. But the small amounts that we consume in our coffee, etc., it's fine, all right? So again, we also noticed that tea, so tea plants, tea leaves also contain caffeine. Obviously not as much as coffee beans, but all of these plants are using caffeine as kind of like a chemical defense mechanism. The second type of chemical defense are antimicrobial enzymes, chemicals, and proteins. So the word antimicrobial, it includes several things. So antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitic agents, and antifungals. So chemicals that target bacteria. These are called antibiotics, and they're produced by the plant. Chemicals that target viruses are antivirals, right? They are also produced by the plant. If the plant produces a chemical that targets parasites, that's an antiparasitic agent. And finally, if the plant produces chemicals that target fungal infections or fungi, these are antifungals. All of these fall under the category of antimicrobials, meaning that they are chemicals produced by the plant that protect it from bacterial, viral, parasitic, and fungal infections. So that's about it for today. I really hope that you were able to kind of answer this learning target, right? So we want to look at physical and chemical examples of defense mechanisms that are used by plants. Um, and that's about it for me today. Have a great day.